There are encounters in life that are not meant to last, they are meant to awaken. They arrive like storms, sweeping away every illusion, tearing through the layers we once built to protect our hearts. And when that storm takes the shape of a narcissist, the empath soul feels torn apart, yet that is precisely when the truth begins to reveal itself. The love between an empath and a narcissist is never random. It is an ancient ritual of the soul where light and shadow meet to reflect, to test, and ultimately to liberate. The empath, the one who lives with an open heart, is drawn toward the darkness, not out of weakness, but because in that darkness their soul recognizes the parts of themselves that still ache for healing. They don't just see the narcissist, they see the abandoned parts of their own, being the parts that longed to be acknowledged, to be loved, to be seen. And in that moment, they believe this must be destiny. But the universe didn't send that person to love you, it sent them to reveal you. When the light of compassion meets the shadow of unacknowledged wounds, a reaction occurs. The emotional whirlwind feels like meeting a twin flame. But in truth, you're standing before your own mirror, forced to face all you've avoided. The fear of abandonment, the need to prove your worth, and the illusion that love must mean unconditional sacrifice. The narcissist is not merely a villain, they are the mirror of your soul's test. In their eyes, you see the reflection of both your light and your darkness. They wound you, but they also remind you of the strength you had forgotten. They make you fall, but through that fall you learn to rise on your own. And that is where the final lesson begins. For the empath's journey is not about learning to love others more deeply, it is about learning to love oneself without needing to be seen. Only then will you understand what Carl Jung meant when he said, "All relationships are encounters between two unconscious minds, and what you see in the other is always a reflection of yourself." There is nothing more powerful than the magnetism between two opposing poles. Light and darkness, empathy and narcissism, the open heart and the fearful ego. Many call it destiny, but for souls that have traveled far enough on the path of awareness, they know it is a deliberate orchestration of the universe. When an empath meets a narcissist, it isn't a coincidence of emotions. It is a spiritual chemistry where opposite energies collide like metal drawn to a magnetic field. On the surface level, the empath sees in the narcissist a soul yearning for love and healing. They sense the wound behind the cold gaze, the defensiveness hidden in control, the pain buried within every outburst that others mistake for instinct. They hear the cry for help behind cruel words, the fear behind arrogance. Meanwhile, the narcissist sees in the empath something they have lost: purity, trust, and genuine presence. To them, the empath is not merely a person, but a mirror reflecting the light they abandoned long ago. That's why they crave, possess, and fear losing them. Yet beneath all those desires lies one truth. Both are searching for their lost selves. At the psychological level, Carl Jung called this the law of opposites, the principle that opposites attract. Darkness is drawn to light because light gives it shape, and light, when still untempered, is drawn to darkness, for within that darkness it sees the potential to expand itself. This is the ancient mechanism of the soul. We are magnetized toward what we fear because within it lies the fragment we have yet to reclaim. The empath, with their ability to feel others' pain as their own, becomes a convergence point for unhealed souls. But that same gift also makes them confuse compassion with salvation. They fail to see that they are mirroring their own wound, the need to be seen, needed, and loved as proof of worth. The narcissist, on the other hand, is haunted by emptiness. They live through others' reactions, like someone without a mirror who no longer knows what they look like. When they meet the empath, it feels like finding that mirror again, finding a sense of existence. Thus, their meeting is not simply two people falling in love. Oh, it is a collision between two energetic systems. One seeks to heal through love, the other to survive through attention. In the beginning, everything feels harmonious, almost fated. The empath feels understood and seen. The narcissist feels validated and admired. Their souls resonate beyond words. like two offbeat melodies accidentally forming a perfect chord. But it is only temporary, because beneath that brilliance, the law of opposites begins to unfold. Light exposes darkness. Darkness exhausts light. One begins to illuminate, the other begins to hide. The empath, believing, if I love enough, they'll change, gives more and more and sinks deeper. The narcissist, feeling seen through, retreats, conceals, and resists. And thus the cycle begins: infatuation, confusion, pain, awakening. But why must it be this way? Why must light meet darkness to know itself as light? Because awareness is not born in comfort. It is born in contrast. No one understands light by standing only in daylight. One must face the night to see the stars. Likewise, the empath cannot learn the limits of compassion until it has been exploited, cannot understand the power of silence until they've been forced to speak to defend the meaningless, cannot know the value of boundaries until they've been violated. The relationship with a narcissist, though painful, becomes a laboratory of the soul where the empath learns what no book can teach. Love does not save anyone. It only illuminates the parts they refuse to see. Many say the empath and the narcissist are like fire and ice. In truth, they are two expressions of the same wound both fear being hurt. The narcissist defends through control. The empath heals through sacrifice. Both believe they are loving, but both are escaping the same fear of abandonment. One clings to avoid loss, the other gives to avoid rejection. When those fears collide, love turns into an invisible battlefield. And in that battlefield, the soul begins its real lesson. Wholeness doesn't come from two people, it comes from each person facing what is missing within. Jung called this the meeting with the shadow. The empath believes they are loving another, but they are really confronting their own shadow, the part that believes love equals endurance, that kindness guarantees reward, that sacrifice leads to happiness. But the shadow does not care for morality or justice. It only wants awakening. When the empath no longer receives recognition, confusion sets in. When their efforts are met with coldness, they feel wounded. Yet deep inside, this is the moment when the inner child rises, demanding healing. It is that forgotten child, once longing for conditional love, that magnetized you toward people like the narcissist. That attraction is not a curse, but a key you can only heal what you dare to see. The love that once felt like a blessing reveals itself as an invitation to ask, are you loving this person, or are you trying to love your own wounded self through them? Are you trying to save them, or the child inside who still believes, if I love enough, they'll stay? Once you answer that, the spell of attraction turns into a lesson. And like all spiritual lessons, it repeats until understood. Empaths don't learn through intellect. They learn through heartache. Each betrayal makes them say, next time, I'll be stronger. Oh, quote. But true strength isn't closing your heart, it's opening it without letting anyone trespass. Not numbness, but clarity. Not coldness, but consciousness. And ironically, it is the narcissist, the one who pushed them to their emotional depths, who forces them to find that wisdom. It's paradoxical, but sometimes darkness is the most compassionate teacher. It doesn't pretend to be gentle. It hurts you just enough that you can never return to the old dream. It forces you to choose, repeat the pattern, or reclaim your energy. And when the empath chooses the latter, the energy reverses. Instead of being drawn in, they begin to radiate. They realize that kindness doesn't need to be proven through suffering. That love does not mean losing freedom. That silence can be stronger than any defense. At this stage, the empath's soul shifts from reactive energy to presence energy. They are no longer led by fear, but guided by awareness. They no longer see the narcissist as the enemy, but as a manifestation of the collective's unhealed pain. They understand that the narcissist wasn't sent to destroy them, but to expose the parts within that were not yet grounded. And once they stand firm, the cycle ends. Yet the original attraction never fully disappears. It simply transforms into understanding, because ultimately, Light and darkness are not separate entities. They are two sides of the same process. Light needs darkness to recognize its brilliance. Darkness needs light to know it is not nothing. Likewise, the empath needed the narcissist to remember, true love does not save others, it liberates yourself. Looking back, the empath realizes that destiny was never about being with them, but awakening through them. From attraction, they become the observer. From unconditional giving, they learn conscious giving. From needing to be understood, they learn to understand themselves. And through that, they uncover one of the soul's deepest paradoxes. Sometimes, the one who broke you was fulfilling the most sacred role in your awakening. There is a primal attraction between light and darkness, not to drag each other down, but to reveal the true nature of existence together. And when the empath realizes this, they stop resenting, stop blaming themselves, stop trying to transform others. They begin to turn inward and see that everything they were seeking in the other, love, acceptance, safety, has always been within themselves. When they understand that, the pull dissolves and freedom begins. That is the meaning of the first lesson in the journey, called the final lesson, understanding why light must meet darkness, not to be eclipsed, but to recognize that the light was never lost. It was only temporarily reflected through souls who did not yet know how to hold it. And now, reclaiming that light, the empath no longer needs any external reflection because they have become the source itself. When the empath steps into the first stage of a relationship with a narcissist, they believe they've found paradise, a connection so intense it feels unreal, a sense of being understood so deeply it borders on the spiritual. But like any illusion, its beauty lasts only until the light of awareness shines on it. Then what they called love suddenly appears as a great mirror, not only reflecting the other's face, but the fragments of their own soul. This false heaven is both a spiritual and psychological phenomenon. It isn't mere infatuation. It is a ritual of the soul's evolution. In the fog of promises, glances, and words like, "I understand you more than anyone," the empath feels what they have sought all their life, perfect harmony. What they don't realize is that what they are seeing is not love, but their own image reflected back, subtly copied by the narcissist like a flawless mirror. From a Jungian perspective, this is the stage where projection operates most powerfully. The empath, carrying the memory of old wounds, unfinished relationships, and times they were not acknowledged, sees in the narcissist a chance to mend the past. They are not loving the other person so much as loving the feeling of being seen in that person's eyes. Meanwhile, the narcissist also projects onto the empath the image of the ideal one, someone who will worship, understand, and patch the crumbling ego. Both are in love with each other's illusions. And within that illusion, the lesson begins. Love in the early stage feels like a sacred rite. They speak the same language, laugh in the same rhythm, and all differences seem to dissolve. The empath feels truly listened to for the first time. The narcissist, long suspicious of everyone, feels as if they've found home. They vow, they pour out their hearts, they connect soul to soul. But what they call soul is actually the reaction between two compatible wounds. One needs to be saved, the other needs to feel meaningful. One needs admiration, the other needs recognition. One fears being forgotten, the other fears not being needed. These two fears coil around each other like climbing vines, forming a wall of illusion called love. Here lies the trap. Everything looks like destiny. The empath reads the signs and believes the universe has arranged this. And indeed, there is an arrangement, but not for love, for awakening. The universe sends us souls who can illuminate the parts we haven't yet seen. If you haven't healed the wound of self-rejection, you'll meet someone who makes you feel chosen. If you haven't learned self-love, you'll meet someone who makes you believe that as long as they're there, you'll be safe. If you haven't learned to honor boundaries, you'll meet someone who tests them to the limit. Every destined soul is a lesson dressed as love. Narcissists have razor-sharp intuition. They scent your hurt the way wolves smell blood, not to harm you immediately. At first, they arrive as a savior. They mirror you with the words, gestures, and attention you've longed for. They don't just love you, they become you. They listen. They echo your emotional language. They remember every small detail, so you'll believe no one understands me like this person. But their love does not flow from an inner spring. It is a survival strategy. A narcissist cannot exist without reflection, so they borrow your light to create an illusion of self. And the empath, in the bliss of being loved, unknowingly fuels that illusion. The truth is, if you haven't learned to see yourself, anyone who reflects you perfectly can intoxicate you. Love at this stage is a spiritual drug. It makes you soar while weaving invisible threads of dependency. You don't notice your energy slowly draining away. Everything revolves around the other, what they think, what they feel, what they want. You wake with them on your mind and fall asleep with them in your heart. You start living in the reflection, and that is when you are farthest from yourself. Gradually, you feel you need them to feel worthy. When they are pleased, you feel lovable. When they grow cold, you feel at fault. Every emotional breath they take becomes the measure of your existence. This is the moment your soul begins to knock softly but insistently. Who are you forgetting? But the empath doesn't hear. They are busy loving, and while they love, the narcissist observes. They note how you react when hurt, how you rush to apologize even when you're not wrong, how you shrink when someone is angry, how you fill silence with care. Each reaction is a data point they record, store, and prepare. They build a psychological map of you, not to understand, but to control. For a narcissist, closeness is never love. It is a tool. And once they hold that map, the real game begins. The paradise starts to crack. At first, it's small comments, harmless tests. You're too sensitive. I was just joking. Why do you always overthink? The empath, eager to keep the peace, begins to adjust. A little yielding, a little silence, a little effort, not to hurt them. But in those small concessions, boundaries are shaved away. Eventually, you no longer know where you end and they begin. Everything blurs like smoke. That is when the illusion of love collapses. The empath realizes that the person who once made them feel seen now renders them invisible. Compliments turn to judgments. Care turns to cold silence. Love, like the sun, suddenly goes dark. You hunt for causes, blame yourself. Think, I must have done something wrong. In truth, you have simply crossed the threshold of illusion. At the deepest level of the experience, this is the fall. In Jung's language, it is when the other's persona begins to crack and the shadow emerges. The empath, always seeing potential, tries to save, to love, to prove that love can defeat darkness. But the universe did not send them to win, it sent them to see. When illusion falls away, what remains is the true portrait of conditional love. You realize you were not loved for who you are, but for the role you played, the savior, the soother, the mirror. When you no longer fulfill that role, the love vanishes. Yet hidden within that harshness is a precious lesson. True love is not tied to a performance. The narcissist teaches you this by stripping away your final illusion about love. They make you understand that loving someone does not mean sacrificing boundaries, nor enduring everything to keep the peace. They show you that some people can only learn through their own loss, and sometimes the most compassionate thing you can do is to walk away. When you see that paradise was only a mirror, resentment fades and understanding remains. Suddenly, everything that happened makes sense. They didn't deceive you, they played a role so you could see yourself more clearly. The soul's lesson is never about avoiding pain. It is about understanding why we hurt. Once you understand, pain becomes a doorway to wisdom. And then, amid the ruins of a fallen illusion, something strange happens. You feel light. For the first time in months, maybe years, you no longer need anyone to feel worthy. You begin to return inward, to a small flame that never went out. That flame is the part of you that remembers. True love never needs to be proven. The empath passes through the false heaven to learn to perceive the illusion within themselves. They understand that sometimes we do not love the other. We love the hope that love can heal the past. But the past does not need more love, it needs understanding. And when you understand, you stop seeking salvation in someone else's eyes. You begin to see yourself in the mirror without any reflection. That is the moment the soul steps through the first door of freedom, not freedom from the other, but from your own illusion. And in that quiet, you hear a simple yet profound truth. Love is not finding someone to make you less lonely. It is finding someone who reminds you that you were never truly alone. When you realize this, the second lesson is complete. You leave the false heaven, not as a failure, but as someone who has awakened from a beautiful yet dangerous dream. You carry not bitterness, but understanding. Because you have seen what few dare to face, that sometimes the ones who hurt us most are the very ones who lead us closer to our true self. At a certain point in the relationship, as the illusion begins to crack, nothing retains the mystical harmony of the beginning. Sweet words grow scarce. The once warm gaze now holds a cold distance. What the empath once felt as resonance hardens into an unnamed suffocation. Not because you changed, but because the mask is fracturing. And through those fractures, the narcissist's darkness begins to leak out quietly but mercilessly. The empath, endowed with deep sensitivity, begins to sense that something is wrong, but they do not rush to judge. They are used to understanding others. They assume every burst of anger has a cause, that if they love enough and stay patient, things will eventually be okay. But this love is no longer a two-way street. It is an energy system with only one side transmitting. Each time you forgive, they learn that your limits can be bent. Each time you keep silent to preserve peace, they understand that your silence can be exploited, and then they begin to experiment. A narcissist lives on reaction, not emotion. When they feel control slipping, they will do anything to restore that energy source. They may criticize, grow indifferent, or suddenly shower you with affection again just to see how you react. They don't want to understand you. They want to measure you. They watch your feelings flare up and die down like a scientist observing reactions in a test tube. And you, still believing in the good within them, don't realize that your love has become a laboratory for maintaining their ego. At a deeper level, Jung calls this phenomenon shadow projection. When someone cannot face their own weakness, they cast it outward onto the nearest person. And no one is more convenient than an empath, someone always ready to receive, to understand, to heal. The narcissist begins to hurl out fragments of shame, fear, and guilt they cannot contain. They make you doubt yourself, convince you the fault is yours, that you are too sensitive, too demanding, too idealistic. And while you are busy fixing yourself, they are spared the burden of facing themselves. This is the moment when the emotional map they built in the early stage is wielded as a weapon. They know exactly which button softens you, which button silences you, which button makes you feel guilty. Every word, every gesture is calculated not by reason, but by the instinct of a soul terrified of exposure. Thus, their manipulation doesn't arise from simple malice. It stems from the fear of being laid bare. When they sense you truly see them, their first reaction is not remorse, but attack. In their world, being seen is equivalent to being annihilated. The empath now feels a profound contradiction. One part knows something is wrong, another still believes that if they love a little more, they'll see the person they met at the beginning. But that original person never existed. It was an image the narcissist crafted to hook you. Now, they no longer play the soulmate, they become the judge. They start attacking the very qualities that once drew them to you. You're too sensitive. You overthink. You always want to control. It's the classic reversal. They turn your light into the reason you should feel ashamed. Jung said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. But in this relationship, that lesson is distorted. The empath begins to realize they are learning not from the other's words, but from the pain the other inflicts. Each time you are blamed, you are invited to ask, where does my reaction come from? When you feel confused, you are invited to look again. Why do I believe them more than my own intuition? That is when the real transformation begins. The collapse of illusion is never gentle. It is a death rite, the death of the version of yourself you believed you were. The empath goes through a stage of spiritual disorientation. They no longer know who they are, what is real, what is false. Those who once brought safety are now the source of fear. The inner world shatters like a broken mirror, and the soul must pick up the pieces and set them in order. This is the most dangerous yet sacred phase, the nigredo of spiritual alchemy. Jung described total darkness before the light is reborn. In that darkness, the empath begins to see that empathy without awareness is no longer a gift, it is a shackle. They realize there are forms of love that do not free but bind, and apologies that are merely tests to see if you are still willing to return. They realize that kindness cannot save someone who revels in their own chaos, and that pain, paradoxically, is the antidote to the illusion of unconditional love. When you realize you cannot save anyone, you begin to understand the true meaning of compassion. It is not enduring every wound, but knowing when to stop before you are consumed. It is the shift from compassion to wisdom, from instinctive love to awakened love. This is the empath's crucial turning point, when they stop seeing others as projects to fix and start seeing them as mirrors, reflecting the parts of themselves that need understanding. Sensing this change, the narcissist driven by control will react. When you no longer respond as before, they feel uneasy. When you grow quiet, they feel threatened. They may switch strategies, turn themselves into the victim. You hurt me. I'm only like this because you make me feel inadequate. It is a role reversal guilt as a tool to pull you back into saving them. But once awareness has begun, the soul cannot go back. The empath starts to observe instead of absorb. They begin recording behaviors instead of justifying them. They see the recurring patterns, the phrases, the manipulations, and recognize this is no longer love, but a loop of power. Each time you explain, they gain more leverage. Each time you try to prove you're right, they see they still control your emotions. But when you stop explaining, stop reacting, stop trying to understand, the game ends. However, endings don't arrive with noise, but with silence. This silence is what they fear most, because it forces them to face themselves without a reflection to cling to. For the empath, silence now is not punishment, but a meditative right. It is how the soul reorders the inner world. They begin to feel their own energy again, the very energy that has been depleted all this time. They realize peace is not granted by another. It is an intrinsic capacity. In this moment, the lesson deepens. Pain does not come to make you weak. It comes to make you real. When the empath understands this, they look back on the entire relationship, not as a tragedy, but as a classroom for the soul. They see that every word, every betrayal, every manipulation was a mirror helping them read the map of their own unconscious. They begin to notice old patterns, how they shrink when criticized, how they over-explain to win acceptance, how they panic when love is withheld. And they see the narcissist was merely the actor exposing all of this. From this awareness, a gentle yet decisive separation occurs. The empath is no longer a victim. They become the awakened observer of the story they once drowned in. They understand that forgiveness is not returning. It is releasing trapped energy. They understand that love is not to change the other, but to free themselves from dependency on the other's reactions. And above all, they understand that sometimes decisiveness is the greatest act of love because it gives both people a chance to face their true nature. When the narcissist's mask finally falls, the empath no longer feels the old rage. There is sadness, but also serenity. They see a lost soul, trapped in defenses so rigid that love can no longer enter. They see the inner child, trembling with the fear of being forgotten. And strangely, they no longer want to save. They simply want to let go. Letting go is not walking away in anger. Letting go is the soul's sacred act of recognizing, I have learned this lesson. And when they let go, a space opens, the space once filled with chaos, now brimming with peace. In that space, they hear more clearly the voice of intuition, of the deep self that was drowned out by emotional noise. The end of this chapter is not about leaving the narcissist, but about leaving the illusion that you can save others with love. That is the root of every collapse. When you stop seeking validation from souls that do not yet know how to love, you step into another form of love, a love with no object, only presence. And that is the transition to the next part of the journey. The collapse where the entire world of illusion crumbles so the soul can be reborn. But before arriving there, there is a truth every empath must engrave in their heart. You were not born to hold other people's masks in place. You were born to live truthfully, even if truth makes others uncomfortable. For truth always unsettles before it liberates. There is a moment in every awakening no one can avoid, the moment of collapse. It does not come like a thunderclap, but in a strange stillness when your heart simply stops resisting, when no excuse is strong enough to justify what is falling apart, and you know you have reached illusion's final edge. This is where love became a battlefield, kindness a chain, and the effort to understand merely another way to keep the pain alive. Yet within that desolation, something extraordinary begins. The soul awakens. After a long season of energetic depletion, the empath feels exhausted. No feeling can excuse it anymore. No beautiful memory is enough to hold it together. They realize what they are clinging to is not the other person, but an old version of themselves, the one who believed love could save everything. When that belief shatters, collapse follows. And this collapse is not merely the end of a relationship. It is the breakdown of the entire belief structure they once lived by. Jung calls this nigredo the black stage of spiritual alchemy, when the old is burned away to make room for the new. The empath falls into an abyss of confusion. The very values they once took pride in, kindness, patience, understanding, now seem like the very reasons they were hurt. They begin to doubt the core of who they are. Have I been too soft? Am I the one at fault? They search for explanations, only to receive silence or denial from the person who once promised never to leave. In that moment, their soul seems to stand between two worlds. The old world of reflections, where everything revolves around others, and the new world of awareness, where they must turn inward to find answers. But the journey inward is never easy. It is like crossing a desert, no map, no handhold, only yourself and the echo of unanswered questions. This is the stage where many empaths mistake themselves for losing everything. They feel empty, exhausted, uninterested in the things that once brought joy. But this is not an ending, it is the dissolution of the old ego. That ego was built over years of wounds. I have value only when I help someone. I am lovable only when I understand others. I am safe only when I keep others happy. When those beliefs are stripped away, the soul free falls. Yet within that fall, a space opens the first time you no longer have to play any role. No longer the healer, no longer the peacemaker, no longer the one who understands everyone. You are simply a being who exists. And that, though painful, is the first freedom you have ever known. During this time, loneliness is no longer a punishment. It is a teacher. You begin to sense yourself not through others' reactions, but through the stillness of your own mind. Some days, everything feels meaningless. Some nights, you feel yourself dissolve into the void, as if the soul were leaving the body. But within that very dissolution, you realize something miraculous. You are still here. Without them, without a reflection, without a script to hold on to, you still exist. And that existence, pure, quiet, needing no proof, is your true soul. This is when the empath begins to learn discernment, a skill they never truly had. Discernment between their own emotions and those absorbed from others. Discernment between compassion and dependency. Discernment between love and the need to be redeemed. This lesson is deep and painful because it requires you to face the places where you have betrayed yourself. You realize that each time you forgave the unforgivable, you were not noble, you were afraid of losing your role. Each time you stayed with someone who hurt you, you were not patient, you were afraid to face the inner emptiness. Each time you kept silent for peace, you were not kind, you chose safety over truth. This truth is not easy to swallow. It breaks your heart once more, but it is the crack needed for the light to enter. Only when you see how you helped sustain the loop can you finally step out of it. Not through hatred, but through spiritual responsibility, understanding that your soul agreed to this experience to learn about boundaries, sovereignty, and conscious love. And then, when all layers of illusion have fallen, a new energy appears. At first, it is fragile like a beam of light in the night. But the more you remain in stillness, the stronger it grows. You begin to feel something being reborn, not faith in people, but trust in the sacred workings of the universe. You begin to understand that every wound has meaning, that even the one who hurt you most was a tool the universe used to bring you back to yourself. From Jung's perspective, this is the moment the soul touches the self, the center of the entire individuation process. The self is not an expanded ego. It is a state of unity between conscious and unconscious, between light and shadow. After walking through emotional hell, the empath begins to see that the narcissist is not a bad person to be destroyed, but a symbol of the collective unconscious aching to be seen. When you grasp this, hatred dissolves, and you step into true compassion, compassion that no longer comes from emotion, but from understanding. You begin to look back at the relationship, not with the eyes of a victim, but with the eyes of an alchemist. You see that the love fulfilled its purpose. It dissolved all your coverings and forced you to become real. Each betrayal taught you a new honesty with yourself. Each silence taught you to listen inward. Each accusation taught you to tell truth from manipulation. And in the end, you realize no one can take from you, because what truly belongs to the soul can never be stolen. Collapse, it turns out, is a form of grace. It strips away the false so the true can be born. Like a brutal winter clearing the way for spring, the desolation of this relationship becomes fertile ground for rebirth, not the rebirth of old love, but the rebirth of awareness. The empath does not return to who they were. They become clearer, calmer, and paradoxically stronger. When they no longer need to be loved to feel enough, they begin to love with freedom. When they no longer need to prove their goodness, they begin to act from wisdom. When they no longer want to save anyone, they become a catalyst for real healing. And this is the beginning of the next stage, the rebirth of the empath, not a mirror for others' pain, but a torch lighting the way for their own soul and for those who follow. But before stepping fully into that light, one final temptation appears, the pull to return. Sensing a loss of control, the narcissist will try everything to draw you back: apologies, memories, the weight of their own loneliness. They will attempt to recreate the false paradise, to revive the person you once loved. And if you are not fully integrated within, your lonely part may stir again. But now you are different. You no longer look with the eyes of emotion, but with the eye of awareness. You see the pattern, hear the repeating tone, and you know this is not love returning, it is the cycle demanding energy. And you smile, not out of pride, but out of understanding. Because this lesson, in the end, was never about them. It was always about you, about how you see, love, and allow yourself to exist. About how you once needed others to feel worthy, and now you do not. About how you once believed love must include pain, and now you know that true love is peace. Collapse, after all, does not destroy you. It destroys your illusion of you. It strips the ego's skin so the soul can breathe. And when the soul breathes, you become like a newborn, unguarded, uncalculating, yet naturally lucid. You know how to love without losing yourself, how to leave without hatred, how to be silent without fear. That is freedom. And this freedom is the gift hidden within the collapse, the gift your soul planned before anything began. Now you no longer ask, why is this happening to me? But say, this is happening for me. You no longer see the narcissist as an enemy, but as a messenger delivering the final note. Return to yourself. From the ashes of illusion, the empath rises not as a saint, but as a whole human being. A person who knows that light and darkness are both parts of being, who knows that love is not fusion, but meeting in freedom, and most of all, who knows that what collapses is not an ending, it is the beginning of truth. For in the end, only when illusion dies can the soul truly live. There is a strange moment in the empath's journey. The moment you stop seeing the narcissist as the villain and begin to see their true soul, not to justify them, nor to return, but because you have come far enough that the light within you is large enough to illuminate their darkness. Then your gaze changes, no longer carrying fear or pity, but pure awareness. You no longer ask, why do they do this? But whisper within, where does it hurt so much that they had to become this way? At the deepest level, narcissism is not self-love. It is the total absence of it. The narcissist does not love themselves. They love the image they think the world will accept. They build a mask out of praise, success, and power, and lock their soul inside it. They do not live through real experiences, but through others' reflections. They only know who they are when they see someone react. When others love, they feel worthy. When others fear, they feel powerful. When others leave, they collapse. That is why they cling to the empath like a child clings to a mother, not out of love, but out of fear of vanishing. Yet the empath, in their sensitivity, is the first to feel that inner emptiness. They sense the soul trapped behind walls of defense, hear the wordless cry hidden in each controlling glance. And this is precisely what traps the empath. They cannot hate someone whose pain they see so clearly. They think, if I love enough, if I am patient, they will awaken. But they do not realize that love cannot save someone who is blindly resisting the light. Carl Jung once wrote, "No one becomes enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." That is exactly what happens when the empath sees the narcissist's true soul. You realize their darkness is not innate malice, but a primal fear, fear of being unloved, of invisibility, of smallness, of facing the self. Once, there were children taught to believe that emotion is weakness, that wounds are shameful, that to be loved they must be perfect. So they learned to build armor, layer upon layer, until one day they themselves forgot who they were. When the empath sees this, they begin to understand. The narcissist does not only manipulate others, they are manipulated by their own fear. They live in a constant battle with the mirror. They fear being truly seen, because then the mask would shatter and the fantasy world they built would collapse with it. And yet, they also long to be seen. That is their tragedy. They want to be loved, but cannot risk vulnerability. They want acceptance, but control others so tightly that love suffocates. They want power, not realizing that the very power they wield is slowly killing their soul. When you understand this, anger dissolves. Not because you forgive, but because you comprehend. You realize that the one who hurt you is someone who never learned how to love themselves. And what you went through with them was not punishment, but a rite of transformation where your soul learns to look at the darkness without fearing it, to understand the darkness without needing to save it, and to stand in your own light without needing recognition. The reversal of the mirror begins there. In the past, they used you as a mirror to feel they existed. Now you look at them to understand the nature of yourself. You see them, and through that you see the part of you that once feared as they do, the part that needed validation, that hid its wounds, that wore the mask of the strong one so no one would see the true pain. When you dare to look not to condemn, but to understand, the darkness within you begins to fade. Jung called this moment the confrontation with the shadow. When the empath faces the narcissist, they are not only facing the other, but their own shadow. And when you can look at that shadow without fear or denial, you become free. Because you no longer need to fight it. You know it's there, and you know it no longer controls you. From here, true compassion is born, not the compassion of a savior, but of one who understands. You know that forgiveness is not overlooking, but no longer letting pain define you. You understand that love is not carrying someone else's load, but illuminating so the other has a chance to see themselves whether they choose to or not. And most importantly, you realize that seeing their soul does not mean you must accompany them. You can see the truth and still walk away. You can feel compassion and still keep your boundaries. When you leave with this awareness, your silence is no longer retaliation. It becomes respect for the soul. You understand that intervening in their journey is no longer love. It robs them of their lesson. You don't need them to understand you because you know they are not yet able to see with the eyes of the soul. You don't need their apology because truth needs no confirmation. You only need to live truthfully because that very truth is the light they once tried to cover. This seeing, perceiving without judging, understanding without binding is a form of spiritual awakening. It is like standing on a mountaintop after the storm. You look down at the ruins, the fragments, and realize that all of it was necessary. Without the storm, you would never have climbed. Without their darkness, you would never have understood your own light. The empath now enters a stage of inner equilibrium. They no longer swing between love and hate, between remembering and forgetting. They simply are calm, clear. When they think of the other, they no longer tremble or rage. They see a soul moving through its own process, a journey in which they no longer have a role. This is the shift from unconscious empathy to conscious compassion. Before, you felt others' pain and confused it with your own. Now you still feel it, but you know whose it is. You know how to hold your energy, how to observe without absorbing. You don't have to shut your heart to protect yourself. You only need to be awake. Seeing the narcissist's soul, you also see the tragedy of being human. Because in each of us lives a part like them, the part afraid of being forgotten, the part striving to prove worth, the part that longs for admiration, the part that hides fear behind perfection. The narcissist is simply an extreme amplification of that part. And when you understand this, you are no longer separate. You perceive the human condition within the very collapse. And that is the moment you truly mature in soul. The mirror's reversal changes not only how you see others, but how you see yourself. You realize that true love is not a feeling state, but a frequency of awareness. At that frequency, you no longer love to be loved back. You love because it is your natural essence. You no longer fear being hurt, because you know that hurt does not kill the soul, only illusions die. You no longer fear the dark, because you have seen the light within it. In this state, you become an illuminator, not through words, but through presence. You don't try to change anyone, yet your very existence invites self-inquiry in others. You don't need to speak to prove anything, because the energy you radiate already reflects truth. And sometimes, by merely standing in that peace, the person who hurt you will feel something they cannot name. This is the light of awareness. They may never say it, never apologize, never change, but it no longer matters, because you have seen their soul. And through it, you have seen the divine, not the God of religion, but the God of consciousness, where every soul, distorted or pristine, is a fragment of the vast tapestry of evolution. When the empath reaches this point, they understand that the journey was never about winning or losing, good or evil, or human justice. It is the journey of consciousness, one the soul chooses to experience both faces of love, light, and darkness. And when they can stand between these poles without being pulled to either side, they become whole. That is when the mirror is set upright. No more warped reflections, no more power games, no more need to be understood. Only a simple, profound truth remains. Everything that ever happened was necessary for you to become yourself. The empath smiles softly, not because they have won, but because they finally see clearly. And in that quiet light, their soul whispers, "I have seen their soul, and through it I have seen myself." From here, the journey enters a new phase, the withdrawal, silence as sacred power, where silence is no longer hiding, but the epiphany of inner strength. But before you go there, pause, take a deep breath, and feel this. You have seen both light and darkness, and you remain whole. Not because you were never hurt, but because you have learned to turn pain into wisdom. That is the supreme power of a soul truly awakened. There is a kind of strength only those who have passed through chaos can understand, the strength of withdrawal, Not withdrawal because you lost, but because you understand there is nothing left to fight for, nothing to prove, nothing to reclaim. When the empath arrives here, they have passed through everything. Love, hurt, understanding, and letting go. What remains is silence. But this silence is not the emptiness of fear, it is the spaciousness of power. Withdrawal doesn't happen in a day. It begins with a sigh, with moments you stop explaining, stop chasing, stop justifying meaningless behavior. At first, silence feels like a wound, painful, because you're used to noise. You miss the conversations, the reactions, even the arguments. Silence looks like loss, but in truth, it is the space in which the soul recollects its energy. As the empath pulls their energy back, the narcissist begins to panic. They live by reflection. When you no longer react, they lose the mirror that tells them they exist. Your silence is not just no contact, it is cutting off supply. They try everything: feigned remorse, the victim role, nostalgic messages, even anger. But to the one who has seen the truth, none of it can move them. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." The empath, after all, has done exactly that, made the unconscious conscious. Their withdrawal is not defense, but the enactment of soul sovereignty. They are not running. They are simply standing still, refusing to play. And when they stand still, the narcissist's entire power structure begins to collapse. For the essence of manipulative power is reaction. It feeds on making others wobble. When you rage, they win. When you cry, they feel important. When you try to prove yourself, they know you remain under their emotional control. But when you are silent, truly silent, they no longer know who they are. That silence, to a narcissist, is the death of the ego. Empaths often think silence is weakness, that speaking out is courage. Sometimes, however, silence is the highest expression of wisdom. It is not that there's nothing to say. It is the recognition that saying it changes nothing. It is the ego's retreat so awareness can be reborn. At a deeper level, your silence affects not only them, it affects you. It forces you to face what you once avoided, yourself. When there is no one left to blame, no one to focus on, every gaze turns inward. You begin to hear the soul's voice, once buried beneath the noise of need, fear, and justification. In silence, fragments of feeling rise: hurt, regret, anger, tenderness. But rather than run, you sit with them. You do not erase, only observe, and slowly they dissolve. Because the nature of emotion is like a wave, if not clung to, it fades. This is liberation. Not liberation from the other, but from your own emotional dependency. When you're no longer pulled by another's rhythm, you begin to hear your own heartbeat. You realize that peace does not arrive after the relationship ends. It begins the moment you stop participating. In this process, silence becomes a sacred language. It is no longer a tool of communication, but a state of being. You don't need to say, "I understand now." Your silence already says everything. You don't need to say, "I forgive." You simply carry nothing left to forgive. Forgiveness is no longer an act. It is the natural effect of understanding. When you understand, resentment dissolves. From the soul's view, your withdrawal marks a new evolutionary level. You are shifting from instinctual love to conscious love. Before, you loved in order to feel alive. Now, you live, and from there, you love. Before, you loved to heal others. Now, you love because you are healed. Before, you were silent out of fear. Now, you are silent because no words are needed. To the narcissist, this silence is incomprehensible. In their world, silence is a tactic, contempt, punishment. But for you, silence is presence. Not avoidance, but choosing a higher frequency. It is how you protect your energy from distortion. And the wonder is this: when you dwell in silence long enough, not only the narcissist, but the entire world begins to respond to you differently. Because the energy you emit is no longer that of someone begging for love, but of someone who is love. You no longer attract the old scripts because you no longer share their frequency. Similar souls, those seeking to control and siphon energy, fade from your life. Not because you fight them, but because your energy no longer resonates. Like radio bands, once you tune to a new frequency, the old channel simply cannot be heard. This is the essence of detachment, emotional separation without numbness. It is the ability to be amid everything without being swept into it. You might see their posts, hear about them, watch them walk with someone else and remain unmoved. You no longer compare, no longer ache, no longer need to know why. Because you understand, what leaves is not punishing you, it is protecting you from further self-betrayal. Withdrawal, in its deepest sense, is the reordering of energy. When you pull energy from what is unworthy, the universe immediately returns what was lost. You begin to attract new things, healthier people, deeper relationships, opportunities that mirror your true worth, not because you asked and received, but because you have become. Jung once said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." Silence is when you sit in the dark without trying to switch on a light, without pleading for rescue. And then you realize the light is not outside, it radiates from within. From that point on, you no longer seek light in others, you are the light. Withdrawal not only saves you, it alters the entire dynamic of the soul. You no longer view life through who's right, who's wrong, who wins, who loses. You see that it is all the movement of energy, each soul learning its own lesson. The narcissist is learning humility. You are learning sovereignty. And when both lessons complete, nothing remains to bind you. This is the stage of inner sovereignty. You no longer seek love to feel worthy, but to share your worth. You don't need to prove your goodness, you simply live it. You don't need to run from the dark, because you've made friends with it. You don't need anyone to understand you, because you already understand yourself. Silence, at this point, is no longer distance. It is a bridge between you and the divine. In every quiet moment, you feel the presence of the sacred, not somewhere far away, but in your very breath. You realize the universe has never taken anything from you. It has only removed what kept you from seeing who you truly are. For the empath, this is a permanent turning point. Once you've experienced the power of conscious withdrawal, you never react the same way again. Because you know reaction is a loss of energy, while presence is power. You understand that every narcissist collapses when deprived of reflective energy, and every darkness weakens when you no longer fear it. They may keep talking, performing, or finding a new audience, but you're no longer a spectator. You're the one backstage, watching the stage dissolve. And you know an ending is not a tragedy. An ending simply means the soul has finished its role. Silence, in the end, is the prayer of souls that have walked the full length of pain. No resentment, no explanations, only awareness and peace. And within that peace you hear the first whisper of new life, soft but unmistakable. Now we can begin again, not from the old self, but from the awakened soul. That is the sacredness of silence. It doesn't close the story. It opens a new chapter, the chapter of freedom. No longer reaction, but creation. No longer the victim, but the storyteller. No longer the mirror, but the lamp. In withdrawal, the empath finally returns not to the one who hurt them, but to themselves, to the original, pure soul, full of light. And as they sit in that silence, they understand this is not the end of the journey, but the beginning of truth. From here, the light within is no longer shaken by any storm. And the universe, like a gentle mother, smiles softly. You have learned the lesson of the dark. Now go live as light. After the soul has passed through the whirlwind of illusion, the collapse of the ego, and the sacred rite of silence, the empath enters a new land of consciousness where light exists on its own, needing no reflection, no one's validation, no understanding. This is true rebirth, not a return as a better version, but as an entirely different being, one who no longer lives unconsciously, but with awareness, one who no longer loves to seek, but loves to be present, one who no longer sees the world through fear, but through the eyes of an awakened soul. Rebirth does not happen in a brilliant moment like in the movies. It is a quiet, slow, deeply paradoxical process. For the soul to be reborn, it must accept death. Death of the old image, the old identity, the beliefs that once felt foundational. For the empath, this means letting go of the very identities they once clung to: the good one, the understanding one, the long-suffering one, the one who is always there. Those labels were once armor, but now they are chains. The soul cannot be free while defining itself by a role. In this phase, they walk in silence, not the silence of ruin, but the silence of formation. They no longer need the noise of emotion to feel alive. They begin to sense life in each breath, in sunlight through a window, in the wind touching their skin. Every moment becomes a rite. Every small thing holds a profound sacredness. For the first time, they are fully present. Not in the past, not in memory, not in fantasies of the future, but in the purity of now. As awareness is purified, love also changes form. It is no longer a river sweeping you away, but a still water within you. The empath begins to love without needing to possess, to help without needing credit, to give without needing return. They no longer try to heal anyone, because they understand each soul has the right to discover its own light. They are no longer wounded by rejection, because they understand rejection doesn't diminish the value of love. It only shows the other is not yet ready to receive. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." After passing through darkness, the empath begins to feel that privilege, the privilege of being themselves without asking permission. They rebuild their life, but this time not on fear, on self-respect. They choose work not for recognition, but because it makes their souls sing. They connect with others not to feel loneliness, but to share presence. They set boundaries not to punish, but to protect inner peace. Rebirth is the process by which light learns to illuminate itself. Once, the empath sought validation in others' eyes. Now they look in the mirror and feel enough. They realize greatness lies not in pleasing everyone, but in being honest with their soul. Honesty means daring to say no when needed, daring to leave when it no longer fits, daring to be silent when argument only wastes energy. But honesty also means daring to love when the heart opens, daring to trust when intuition speaks, daring to live fully even if the world isn't ready to understand. In this rebirth, something profound occurs. The empath begins to converse with their own soul. No longer begging for advice from others, they listen to the whisper within the voice once drowned out by fear and expectation. That voice does not command or judge. It simply reminds, you are enough. And each time they hear it, they cry not from sadness, but because for the first time they are held by themselves. From there, they understand that true healing is not forgetting the former person, but ceasing to define themselves by the old story. They no longer say, I am a victim, I was betrayed, I endured. They simply say, I am awakened. And when a soul can say this with peace, the entire universe bows. It is the sign the lesson is complete. But rebirth is not separation from the world, it is reintegration. The empath returns to life, but with different eyes. They still work, love, and laugh, but without attachment. They can listen to others' pain without being swept away, stand in a crowd and keep their inner stillness. They no longer need to prove their identity by being different or noble. A mature soul doesn't need to stand apart. It blends without dissolving. This is when they learn the art of balancing light and shadow. No longer rejecting their shadow, they learn to speak with it. When anger arises, they don't suppress it. They ask, what do you want me to know? When fear appears, they don't banish it. They hold it. What are you trying to protect me from? In this understanding, the shadow becomes an ally, not an enemy. Then something unexpected happens. The empath realizes they are no longer haunted by the narcissist. No more urge to analyze them, talk about them, or prove they've moved on. They simply don't think about them. not because they forced themselves to forget, but because there is no longer any energetic tether at the karmic level. When the lesson is complete, the energy dissolves. And when energy dissolves, peace appears light as breath. Jung likened this process to Rubedo, the red stage of spiritual alchemy, when the soul is unified after dissolution and purification. That red is the color of life, of love, of awakening. The empath now carries that flame, not a raging blaze, but a steady, warm, steadfast light. They no longer seek the special one, because they understand every soul is special when seen with awakened eyes. One of the clearest signs of rebirth is the ability to laugh at what once made you cry, not out of scorn, but out of understanding. Looking back on those painful days, you see a soul learning to love itself, a heart daring to open despite wounds, a human crossing the dark night to find dawn. And you smile, because you know without all of it, you would never have met this lucid version of yourself. Rebirth also brings a different form of love, awakened love. It no longer begins with attraction or passion, but with peace. The person who comes doesn't make your heart race, they make you feel safe. They don't keep you up at night, they help you sleep well. They don't make you doubt yourself, they help you know yourself better. This is not a twin flame in the romantic sense, but a soul of the same frequency, someone before whom you don't need to hide your shadow because they've made peace with theirs. When two souls like this meet, love is no longer a test, but an expansion of light. Rebirth doesn't mean you'll never hurt again. Pain still comes, but you're no longer afraid, because you know pain is simply the expansion of awareness. Whenever your heart tightens, you ask, what is this lesson teaching me? And in that moment, you turn pain into wisdom, tears into understanding, and loneliness into meditation. The reborn empath is like a forest after the fire. The old trees have been burned away, but from the ashes, new shoots emerge stronger, more resilient, greener than ever. No one realizes that the very flame that once destroyed is also what nourished the soil for renewal. And in the same way, the relationship that once shattered you was the very thing that brought you closer to your soul than ever before. Here, a final truth is revealed. True love is never lost. It only changes form. The love you once gave to that person has now become the compassion you offer to the world. The pain that once took your breath away has become the strength that allows you to lift others. The tears that once fell in despair have turned into a river of wisdom. You no longer carry the story of a victim, you carry the light of a storyteller. This rebirth requires no witnesses, no applause, no promises. It happens in silence, in every breath, in each small daily choice. You return to the world, but the world is no longer the same because you are no longer the same. Everything you see reflects your awakening. You look at someone angry and see the child inside them crying for help. You look at someone numb and see a heart that was once frozen by pain. You look at yourself in the mirror and see God smiling through your eyes. That is the sign of a soul that has completed a cycle. No longer afraid of the dark, no longer chasing the light, just being the light. And when you live at that level, everything that comes your way becomes an ally, whether loss or blessing, beginning or ending. Because you know that, in its deepest essence, everything is love taking form. This is rebirth, the stage where the empath no longer seeks meaning, because they have become meaning itself. At the deepest level, you understand, the narcissist was never your enemy, but the messenger God sent to break your shell so your light could escape. And now, as that light stands firm, you know that no one can extinguish it because it no longer depends on anyone. You have learned how to stand alone, and when light learns to stand alone, it no longer needs protection. It becomes the source of illumination for the world. In the end, the empath's journey is not a story about who they loved, who they lost, or whom they forgave. It is the story of how their soul found its way home. Everything that happened, the broken promises, the lonely nights, the wounds that once seemed unhealable, was never random. All of it was arranged as layers of a sacred ritual, peeling away the shells that concealed the true self. From within the ruins, the soul awakens to the realization, I was never weak. I was only learning to remember my own strength. The so-called final lesson the universe gives to the empath is not about understanding the narcissist. It's about understanding oneself in the face of darkness. When you can look into the eyes of the one who once caused you the deepest pain and feel no hatred, only stillness, that is the sign you have crossed the final threshold. When you can recall the past without trembling, only with gratitude, that is the moment you are truly free. Carl Jung once said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Through this journey, the empath has done exactly that. They have drawn the light of awareness down into the depths where darkness once ruled, where false beliefs, emotional bonds, and forgotten fragments of the soul were hiding. They have learned how to sit in the storm without losing their center, how to love without possessing, how to remain silent without fearing abandonment. The final lesson is not about stopping love, but about loving differently. Not loving to fill a void, but to illuminate. Not loving to be mirrored, but to awaken. Not loving from lack, but from wholeness. When that kind of love blooms, it is no longer between two people, it is between the soul and the universe. It becomes a frequency, a presence, a way of being. And when you dwell in that frequency, nothing can touch you, for you have merged with the very creative force of life itself. The empath, once a student of pain, has become a teacher of light. They do not preach, they do not prove, they simply are. Every action, every word, every glance carries the vibration of awareness. They are the living embodiment of the soul's great law. Only when the heart breaks open does it have enough space for the light to enter. When you look back on the entire journey from love to heartbreak, to collapse, to silence, to rebirth, you see something profound. Everything was perfect in its imperfection. Without the narcissist, you would never have discovered your boundaries. Without manipulation, you would never have learned sovereignty. Without betrayal, you would never have learned loyalty to yourself. They did not come to destroy you, but to break the shell, so that you could become the pure light your soul was always meant to be. And this is the final lesson. Love is not salvation, it is awareness. When you become aware, you no longer love with a desperate heart, but with a soul that has learned to listen. You no longer chase love, because you have become love. From this point on, life is no longer a chain of painful lessons, but a stage for the creative expression of the awakened soul. Every person you meet is a mirror. Every challenge is a reflection. Every pain is an invitation to return home. And when you understand that, everything becomes light. There is no one left to forgive. Nothing left to regret, only serene presence, where past and future dissolve into the stillness of now. You no longer fight to be seen, because you see yourself. You no longer need to be loved, because you are love. And in that moment, when you sit in peace and silence, needing nothing, lacking nothing, you realize this is what every soul, through countless lifetimes, has been searching for. The union of light and shadow, of human and divine, of pain and love. The empath's journey does not end here. It only begins anew, on another frequency, where they are no longer the victim of the story, but the storyteller of light. And every soul they touch, even with a single look or a single word, will remember what they once forgot, that in the deepest darkness, we are all made of light. Carry that light with you, not to prove, but to live, not to save, but to illuminate, not to be loved, but to be love. For when you live as light, no darkness can touch you again. And that is the silent, eternal, and most beautiful victory of a soul that has mastered its final lesson.